Welcome to the Narrate podcast, where we aim to tell God's story with our lives. We'll be continuing to post the Sunday message each week, but we want to dive a little deeper and offer some content to supplement your life with God, and that's where our Beyond Sunday series comes in. Join Adam and Narrate staff as they provide thoughtful discussions, ideas, and interviews that go beyond the message you'll hear on Sunday.
I think there's still another aspect of churchmanship that merits our consideration. Specifically, I think we have to explore the role of Sunday mornings, or the importance of Sunday mornings, or the lack thereof. See, I used to evaluate church attendance by asking the extent to which it did or did not meet a felt need. Did it answer a question I was asking? Did it make me feel good about God? Did I learn something worthwhile? Was it enjoyable? Was it fun? Did I get anything out of it? And to be clear, I still think those are important goals for those of us organizing church gatherings. But what if there's an inherent danger to evaluating the role of Sunday gatherings based solely on those types of tangible things? What if it hints at an unhealthy, consumeristic mindset? In the words of Strahan Coleman, feelings make great companions but terrible masters. And I guess what I want to explore is what if we do well to think about to what extent, if any, is Sunday morning a non-negotiable? I mean, I've been thinking about it this way. There's several non-negotiables in my life. For me, I would start with my morning time in the Bible and prayer and listening, all with hot tea in hand, that 30 minutes to an hour every day but Sunday. It's non-negotiable. So is going to the gym for 30-ish minutes. So is taking Yachty for a run. So is eating a healthy breakfast and then a healthy lunch. And these are all particularly tied to the work week. I think mountain biking several times a week has become for me a non-negotiable. I think watching the Broncos, if at all possible, is a non-negotiable. Watering my bonsais, time with Teresa and my boys. There's several of these kind of unstated non-negotiables in my life. What are yours? What are the have-tos? What are the things that make you you? The things that keep you properly animated, healthy, alive, connected with God? For the record, I'm reluctant to ask these questions because rarely does religion go well when we speak from a place of shoulds or ought tos. I pride myself in steering way clear of leading from that lane. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm offering this on this podcast stream, not in a Sunday morning. I don't want to get heavy-handed about Sundays. I don't think that leads to a good place. I think I'm exploring this, or at least I'd like to think I'm exploring this from a more honest kind of theological position of to what extent, if any, are Sunday mornings properly important and even non-negotiable? See, my personal context is this. Having spent the first 10 years of my adult life working at a church that was really good at programming fantastically engaging church gatherings, I was eventually invited to plant a church with the aim of reproducing those results in Helena. Truth is, I was never great at it. Cool, funny, even lighthearted aren't phrases used to describe me, at least not often. But after 15 years or so, and with the help of a lot of great people around Narrate, we eventually got decent at creating gatherings more easily confused with effective late modern megachurches. And to be clear, I have great respect for great modern megachurches. I became more than a cultural Christian because of a megachurch. I'm very fond of many megachurches. I'm grateful for the time I spent in them. The point I'm trying to make is, after about 15 years, we became decent at it. Then COVID hit. Sorry, it kind of all comes back to COVID. Early in those days, it quickly became clear to us that it didn't matter how good we were at programming because people weren't coming. And if they were, it was for vastly different reasons than prior to COVID. Slowly, what we observed was that those able to attend, and I use the word able intentionally because I accept that for some, they simply could not attend. I'm not trying to make anyone feel poorly for not attending Narrate or anywhere else. But for those who did attend, it became very clear very quickly that they wanted way more than what we were doing previously. They wanted way more than church entertainment. They were there because they wanted help. They wanted insight. They wanted depth of life with God. They wanted relationship with one another. They wanted something more than individualistic therapeutic Christianity. The room was no longer full of people terrified of boredom, but instead was filled with people who were after something. This journey led us to introducing communion on a weekly basis. We didn't have a lot of rationale for why, other than we observed that it was something we could do together that we couldn't do alone, or at least maybe shouldn't do alone. I think we were humbled by the fact that for most of church history, Eucharist was a part of gathering weekly, or in the very least, monthly. In the text, it comes across as a really big deal. And so we started. And along the way, I think we tapped into the fact that some things are best understood by doing. Weekly Eucharist invited us to experience church in a manner that decentralized the sermon. No longer was everything a ramp up to the sermon, but we started to have a deeper sense of worship. We started to value hearing the scriptures read as well as taught. We were trying to find some balance between what we knew and what we were learning. Suddenly, church became about a lot of things, not just one. Church became about connections with one another, even if it was only a quick checking in and thus a sense of felt community. See, over time, Sunday started to feel more and more important, but we struggled to articulate why. Nearly 5 years later, I'm now aware I personally place more value and importance on the Sunday experience than I did for most of my Christian life. Now, admittedly, that's easy for me to say. I get paid to be there. Yet still I'm aware that the Sunday experience is a spiritual practice I need, and others need me to need. Again, this is tricky because I spent most of my professional life with an attitude which, while I never said it, in hindsight, my attitude was, church isn't that important, but we're going to be so good at it that you wouldn't dare miss it. And then people kind of cashed that check. They agreed it wasn't important. It didn't add much value, and even if it did, it was a very negotiable value. Now, to be clear, I still think church should be hospitable, especially to outsiders. I still think the sermon should be engaging and helpful. I still think good art matters, especially good music. But I also think beyond those things, we do well to gather weekly for all the things I said earlier, and no doubt many more. In a recent conversation with Bishop Todd Hunter, he made the comment that for him, church on Sunday has become a vital spiritual practice. Actually, what he said is, quote, "I see Sundays as a spiritual practice that has practices within it," unquote. He went on to say that he attends church weekly because he values a bunch of things, like hearing scripture read aloud, weekly confessing our sins and hearing our absolution or our forgiveness stated, saying the creed in the sense of this is who we are as humans, this is our story, this is our family, receiving Eucharist, and hearing the Bible taught. Then more recently, my spiritual director, Bob Marshall, this brilliant man who's a former Navy chaplain, and I really, really respect him. He lives in Washington. We were talking, and he and I have talked off and on for 5 or 6 years now. And he said, "Adam, I pray for Narrate because I understand you live in a community that lives for outdoor recreation, and thus church gets easily pushed aside." I don't think I'd ever said that directly to him. I think that's credit to him and his own intuition. And it began to get me to think more and more about what if we're wrong in our decentralizing of Sunday? See, my feelings plus recent conversations with Todd and Bob got me thinking maybe we do need to provoke one another to think a little more intentionally about the priority of Sundays. Is it a non-negotiable? Not out of legalism, but similar to going to the gym or eating healthy lunch and breakfast or morning quiet times with God or date nights with my wife. See, for me, the gym, eating healthy during the week, morning quiet times with God, and date nights, they all illustrate that I do have non-negotiables in my life. And I have them because I know that when I miss them, everyone around me suffers. Now, sometimes I'm giddy to do them, but quite honestly, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes they're just something that I do because I know I'm supposed to, and I trust the bigger narrative arc, the longer story of it. I do them because I've come to accept the cumulative long-term impact they make. The question I'm trying to ask is, what if we do well to put Sundays into a similar category? See, I'm also aware I don't get to be heavy-handed on this. We live in a community that lives for a number of outdoor recreational interests. We live in a time when most attend church when there's nothing else to do. It's the last priority, not the first. Me promoting attendance is a bit of a conflict of interest, and yet I and the rest of the staff, we have a front row seat to the tremendous value that comes for those who attend regularly. Even more, and this is where this falls under the high or low up the candle part 2, I'm growing more and more aware that God is not a product to be consumed. He's a God worthy of our admiration. I'm also reminded that my friend and mentor Fred Nelson gives great emphasis to couples getting away a few times a year. He has some questions for them to ask. It's mostly unprogrammed, but there's one particular meeting where he wants them to do one particular activity, and that is to list out those activities and then to go through that list after they've done so, everything that we have on our calendars. And there's a few questions that he wants to ask. It has to do with, is this still fulfilling? Is it still doing good? But the specific one that I want to talk about here is this one of, does this fulfill a moral obligation? I remember asking him once for an example of something that fulfills a moral obligation, and his example was weekly church attendance. Now, the irony of this priority is I'd say no one spends more time in the week praying and meeting with people for Bible study. No one's life is more about God that I know than Fred. He's more dedicated to the kingdom than anybody I know, or at least as dedicated as anybody I know. And because of Fred's robust discipleship ministry, he also has a front row seat to all the ways churches hurt people. It's not lost on me that most people, like Fred, don't do church. If anything, they're critical of church. And yet still, as a person of the text, he puts weekly church attendance under that category of moral obligation. But you know what church historians might call that? Churchmanship. So the question becomes, how does this have anything to do with Anglicanism? By introducing me to ancient liturgy and the sacrament of communion, by awakening me to the chief reforms made some 500 years ago to the Sunday experience, Anglicanism has helped me to see Sunday church services are about far more than sermons, or at least they can be. At their best, church on Sunday becomes a key discipline which forms and shapes us into the kind of people who embody what Jesus meant when he said, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness." Additionally, the value of Sundays is a function of churchmanship. Part of the Reformation conversation was how important is church? See, in addition to vestments and candles and incense, churchmanship speaks to the value of gathering for weekly worship in community. Some versions of early Protestantism didn't just deconstruct church architecture and practice, but they also deconstructed the importance of weekly gatherings. So personally, while I'd prefer a low church expression and see it as important to our role in Helena, I think I'm becoming more and more quote-unquote high church as it relates to the values for making Sundays a priority. I think a close examination of church history and biblical theology would say, no, local church matters. And I guess I bring all this up to say churchmanship isn't just about vestments and candles and incense. It's also about the extent to which Sunday morning is deserving of our making it a priority, if it's something God would call us to do. I think as you explore your own faith and the identity therein, it's something to think about. And again, I promise, I intend to work hard not to get heavy-handed on this one. I get and respect all the reasons Sunday attendance can be erratic. But maybe God will nudge you to think a little bit differently. And if not, I'll leave that to him and you to work out as well. Bottom line, churchmanship isn't just about vestments. It's about the local church and God's sending of his Spirit, not just into a person, but better said, into a people. Thanks for listening.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.